Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
I genuinely think that if we want to normalize diversity in American cooking, we have to get to people when they're young. And so my hope is that this book will help to raise a generation of open-minded, curious, and empathetic cooks. And that in 30 years, that people of color won't be sitting in rooms at food magazines trying to argue for why their food deserves a place at the table.
Hey everyone, I'm Bianca Schultz from the Children's Book Review, and this is the Growing Readers Podcast. Today, we're traveling the world and going on a food, culture, and culinary adventure. I have the privilege of chatting with Priya Krishna, a culinary powerhouse who's a reporter, video host for the New York Times, and a best-selling author renowned for cookbooks such as Indianish and Cooking at Home. Her insightful stories earned her a place in the prestigious Best American Food Writing editions of 2019 and 2021. Not stopping there, Forbes recognized Priya's talent and dedication when she was named to their esteemed 30 Under 30 list in 2021. Hailing from Dallas, Texas, Priya's upbringing has undoubtedly infused her culinary adventures with a rich tapestry of flavors and cultures. It's a pleasure to have her here with us today to share her latest cookbook, Priya's Kitchen Adventures. So grab a seat at our virtual table, prepare your taste buds for an adventure, and join me as we savor the flavors of life one bite at a time. But first, here's the synopsis. From the beloved New York Times best-selling author of Indianish and Cooking at Home, an illustrated cookbook for kids and their parents that draws on Priya's childhood experiences traveling the globe with her family. With delicious recipes and laugh-out-loud stories, Priya's Kitchen Adventures will get kids cooking and expand their curiosity around the world. Climbing the Great Wall of China, camping in the Amazon jungle, sliding down the dunes of the Sahara Desert. Oh, and did she mention slurping ramen in Japan, sipping aguas frescas in Mexico, and enjoying British high tea? Before Priya Krishna was a celebrated food writer, she was a kid traveler. Thanks to her appetite for exploration and a mom who worked in air travel, by the time she was a teenager, she had done all this and more. Traveling unlocked Priya's sense of discovery and inspired her to get cooking. In this bright and kid-friendly cookbook, kids can travel the world with Priya. No passport required, just an open mind and a kitchen. Through her eyes, kids and their parents can see and taste China, Greece, Peru, Mexico, Morocco, England, Italy, Japan, France, Egypt, Trinidad and Tobago, and India. The whole family will love making and tasting each kid-tested recipe, brought to life with vivid photos and colorful illustrations, plus step-by-step how-to photos, and sharing Priya's dynamic and often hilarious tales of adventure. They'll come to discover what Priya was lucky to learn as a kid, that cooking is one of our greatest superpowers, allowing us to travel in our kitchens and learn about incredible places and cultures without the jet lag. Recipes include pork and chive dumplings, tostadas with refried beans and squash, miso ramen, pesto pasta, chocolate mousse, artichokes with butter, vegetable tagine, and crepes. With Priya's Kitchen Adventures, the whole world is open for discovery. right from our very own kitchen. Hello, Priya. It's such a pleasure to have you on the Growing Readers podcast. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to talk to you, and I love your background also, to boot.
Thank you. This is really cool for me because you're our very first cookbook guest and our very first New York Times reporter. So I have to start by asking you, what's it like being a food reporter for such a well-known establishment?
It's really fun. I will be honest. It's like I sometimes have to pinch myself and remind myself that my job is to travel and eat and cook for a living. And it's wonderful. And so I'm always thinking about, like, how do I use this tremendous platform to champion the voices of people who haven't been championed in our industry? So I try to look for restaurants and cooks and foods in the corners no one else is looking.
What's a recent discovery that you've come across?
A restaurant in Austin that sells Uyghur-style skewers. The Uyghur community is an oppressed ethnic minority in China, and the food is just fantastic. And I found a place serving that cuisine in Austin, Texas.
That's so amazing. I mean, this just sounds like the coolest job ever. So I have to ask you, because it sounds so magical. Well, what is one thing that you do every day that you think would either be the most surprising or the most relatable to our listeners?
One thing I do every day, I'm trying to think, what is one thing I do every day? I take antacid. I eat a lot for my job, so I have to regularly take antacids. Food writers have acid reflux too. That's all I have to say.
That's so funny. I was like trying so hard not to burst out loud because I didn't want to cover up your answer there, but that's hilarious. I love that. I feel like everybody typically goes with a like relatable, and that is relatable, but that's also really surprising. So it was like it was the double. All right. Well, your journey from a kid traveler to a celebrated food writer is so fascinating. So since your family's love for travel played such a significant role in your upbringing, why don't you tell us about how your family first became travelers?
Yeah, I mean, my parents basically didn't travel for the first few decades of their lives. They grew up in India and they immigrated to America in the 80s. And my mom basically put herself through college and graduate school, and she really wanted a job that would allow her to travel. And when we moved to Dallas to be closer to her family, my uncle was working for American Airlines and asked if she would be interested in interviewing there. And so my mom ended up basically turning that one interview into a lifelong career in travel. And so she and my dad, I think, have always loved to travel. They've always been curious about things that are different from them, about languages, food, culture, art, music, that's different, that comes from different cultures. I feel really lucky to have grown up in that environment. And, you know, when you work for the airline, you basically get to travel at a very steep discount, or if there's room on a flight, you can hop on. So I basically grew up going to the airport, wondering which flight we were going to get on, and if we were going to get on a flight at all.
I love that. There's actually a reference in your cookbook about how you're hoping to hop on a plane and go to the Bahamas, but sometimes you find your way back to the parking lot before getting on a flight at all.
There was a lot of disappointment.
Yeah. All right. Well, out of all the incredible places that you have visited, do you have one trip that stands out as the most memorable? And if so, what made that trip special?
I mean, I think that, like a lot of kids, I really took for granted that we traveled early on. You know, I don't think I appreciated what a privilege it was. And then we went to Egypt. I think I was 8 years old. And I remember I was the right size to get to climb inside the Great Pyramid, which basically is like path to the tomb room is sort of built like a maze. It's lots of really tiny nooks and crannies. And I think that staring at the Great Pyramid of Giza and then getting to climb inside it was sort of this moment as a child where I was like, oh my God, travel is amazing. I feel like that was the first thing that really like took my breath away.
I didn't start traveling till I was 18 and I've not been to Egypt, and that would just be such an incredible experience.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't you share with the listeners how your family's love for travel ended up shaping your culinary adventures that you go on now? So how did your experiences traveling the globe influence your love of food and cooking?
I mean, it's why I'm interested in food and cooking. You know, I feel like if my previous cookbook, Indianish, is like a story about how I became comfortable being myself, this is a book about how I became interested in food. I don't think I realized until I went back through my childhood diaries just how much I loved food, even as a young kid. But like you'll see, you can read me talking about the chocolate mousse in France, the hummus in Egypt, the, kiwicha in Peru. Like it was all so fascinating to me. And I think that as a kid, a lot of the historical stuff felt like a lot to process. We'd go on these really long 3-hour walking tours and I didn't understand what they were going to say. But food was such an easy way for me to understand the culture, especially at a really young age. And I love having new flavor experiences, trying a food item or a flavor that's completely new to me. And travel was just full of those experiences. And there are some food memories that just have stuck in my head that, like, to this day, I can like close my eyes and imagine what that thing in that place tasted like. And that's pretty magical.
When my family and we go traveling, I mean, we just love to walk everywhere. And
Same.
And so like, I feel like sometimes you end up eating something that you wouldn't have planned to eat when you walk, because you go past something and you're like, oh, we have to try this. And I mean, when we took a great trip to France, and a lot of it was baked goods, of course, but I mean, so we tried so many different kinds of pastries that I would never have imagined. And yeah, it was incredible. So I'm glad you like to walk too.
One of our big things is we walk everywhere and we stop at every fruit stand, because every country has its own produce. And my mom in particular loved finding out, like, what are the fruits of Trinidad? What are the fruits of Japan? What are the fruits of, this part of India that we've never been to? And so walking really allows you to see all the fruit sellers. Or if we had a rental car, if we saw a fruit seller, we would be, stopping on the side of the road and seeing what was fresh.
Yeah. And like, I feel like fruit, there's some really unusual fruits that exist in the world. This one's probably not so random to you, but I was in Whole Foods and it was, I think, called Buddha's hand. And it was
Buddha's hand is cool.
Yeah, the lemon. I mean, that was crazy.
It's so fragrant and wonderful. I remember I had a similar experience. We were in Shanghai and there was a guy selling lychees out of a guitar case. And I had never seen something like that. It was like a globe with little spiky hair coming out of it. It sort of looked like a creature from Star Wars. And my mom showed me how you eat it. You peel it back and then it has this gelatinous center and you suck the seed out. Oh, it was like, that was such a memorable experience. Oh my God. I've loved lychees since.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's talk about this latest cookbook. It's called Priya's Kitchen Adventures. I mean, you've sort of touched on this, but let's go a bit deeper. What inspired you to create a cookbook that's specifically for kids?
I hadn't thought about writing a cookbook for kids, but I loved kids' cookbooks growing up. I was so into food, and I thought about all the books that I grew up with and realized that the genre is, despite the fact that kids are now exposed to so many different cultures, that they now have access to YouTube and streaming, and they can see into different worlds online, that kids' cookbooks haven't really kept up with the state of the world. With some amazing exceptions, most kids' cookbooks are authored by white people, and the recipes are very white, Western, and kind of simplistic. I feel like you're looking at, PB&Js cut in the shape of hearts, fruit salads sprinkled with Fruit Loops. These are real recipes I've seen in kids' cookbooks. And the more I talk to the kids, the more I realize kids are excited about food. They're eager, they're curious. and they want food that they wanted food that made them feel empowered, that made them feel like they were adults preparing a meal for their parents, for their friends. And I just felt like there was room for a kids cookbook that felt truly inclusive and that expanded the definition of kid friendly to be far more diverse, beyond the scope of turkey roll-ups and, Fruit Loop topped salad. And I worked with 30 kid recipe testers, and I feel like they really like proved the premise of the book to me, like seeing their enthusiasm, seeing their excitement, seeing their honest feedback, good and bad, made me feel like kids are ready for a book like this, and that we should expect more of kids, that they want to eat more than just sandwiches in the shape of a heart and a star. They're eager and curious and excited. And, my hope is that by cooking with different flavors at a young age, maybe you'll grow up to be a bit more open-minded, a bit more empathetic, sort of open to the different.
This conversation's supposed to be all about you, but I feel like I need to share just a little backstory of me and my family in terms of eating. So I was raised by a mom who didn't have the confidence to really cook a whole lot of different meals. And my dad took on the cooking, but it was like burnt meat, a potato, and vegetables. And so I don't think I really grew up with this amazing love for food. And now I just love things with flavor. Like I think Thai and Indian food are two of my sort of favorite cultural cuisines. And then I have 3 kids. And so when my first was born, I was like, I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to make baby food. So we just did all the the pouch foods and all. But then when my middle child came along, she was born 6 years later. A friend of mine gave me the Williams-Sonoma baby cookbook. I don't think it's in print anymore, but I literally was like, I'm doing this. We're making baby food. I've got the time. And I went through and I gave her each different meal through the book. I never gave her the same thing twice.
That's awesome.
Then my third one came along and we were a bit busier. And so we did a little bit of both. We did a little bit of the, store-bought food. And guess who my best eater is? It's my middle kid. And she loves flavor. She loves spice. She loves salmon. I mean, sushi. She likes it all. And I would say the pickiness of the eating is equivalent to how I fed them as babies. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a food expert, but I saw that so clearly. And so then I wanted you to know that my middle kiddo this summer wants to use your cookbook as basically her at-home summer camp and travel the world and go through and cook the meals for her family, which is going to be me. I'm going to get to eat all of these delicious meals. So I really wanted you to know that. And so the fact that you just said what you said, I was like, I have to share my story here because I think when you do introduce the flavors and you're not afraid to introduce the flavors, the kids do like them.
I thank you for saying that. That is the ultimate way I could see a kid using the book is like turning it into their own personal summer camp or winter break. I was talking to a child psychologist the other day about my book, and she was saying that she feels like a lot of the reason why parents feed their kids, these very simplistic things is because they are not confident in their own cooking abilities. And so that lack of confidence then translates to even more toned down plain food for their kids. And then that becomes what the kids' norm looks like. And then they come to expect that food. So it's sort of interesting how I always wonder how much of this is nature versus nurture. But I think in the case of food, there's a very strong nurture element.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the cookbook's format and how it features recipes, as we've kind of discussed about various different cultures?
Yeah. So the cookbook is separated by chapter, and each chapter is a different country. And I didn't want a cookbook that was all text. So with most of the recipes, you have step-by-step photos that will tell you, what is the pasta supposed to look like when you're rolling it out? How do you how do you pinch a dumpling and pleat the side? There are diagrams, there are beautiful photos, and there are illustrations of me and my family and us traveling courtesy of this really amazing animator named Anu Chauhan, who I basically told, turn my family into like a kid's cartoon. And she did a really amazing job.
It's so fun. It's this travel journal meets these amazing recipes, meets diversity, inclusivity. I mean, it's kind of this like magical wonder of a book, in my opinion. You obviously have traveled a lot and you have all of these different experiences and favorite foods. And you had your group, I think you said, of 30 test kid chefs and food tasters. So just talk to me a little bit more about the curation of the recipes and how hard it was to actually settle on which ones to include.
Yeah. I started with my own memories. Like I talked to my family about like what were the dishes that really stood out from each of these countries. And then I thought about like, how am I defining a kid-friendly recipe? What does a kid recipe mean to me? And to me, a kid recipe is inclusive. It is clear. The instructions are clear and direct. It doesn't require too much chopping or special equipment. And it empowers kids. It gives them choice. It says, here's how to make a squash tostada, but then how you top it is your choice. If you want to top it with cheese or avocado or radishes, you can build your own. And to me, that felt really different to what the definition of a kid-friendly recipe is today. When you think about it, it's a lot more toned down, a lot more beige, a lot more Western. So that was sort of my first criteria. There were recipes that kids just didn't like, that just didn't work. And I took them out. There were recipes that were just a little too hard, a little too technical, but not that many. There were maybe like 2 recipes that were too technical. So I took them out. And I would say one of my biggest takeaways was realizing that the line between a kid and adult recipe is actually a lot blurrier than we think. Like I would talk about this with my friends and they'd be like, we also want recipes with clear instructions, minimal chopping, that feel empowering, where we can make choices depending on our taste. And so in many ways, like, yes, this is a kid's cookbook, but it's also just like a cookbook full of like very good beginner recipes that introduce you to like a number of cuisines. These recipes have actually become like a big part of my own weeknight rotation, because it's just like how to achieve big flavor with minimal chopping and steps. And that's something I can get behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said a couple things I want to dive in on there, but I'm going to go with this. So I love the way the illustrations in the upfront notes show how to cut specific vegetables. The way the cut marks are just drawn through the illustrations. Even I learned something as an adult. So I've always looked at a piece of ginger and been like, how the heck am I supposed to cut ginger? And now I know.
Well, just to tell you, the reason that exists is because one of my kid recipe testers suggested it. She said, I didn't know how to separate a green and the white part of the scallion and how to cut it. Could you include a diagram? And I was like, that is a great idea. Why don't I include a diagram for all the vegetables? So
yeah.
Kids are smart.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that you said too is that I think sometimes we're afraid our cooking sometimes takes a lot, and to spend, even if it's 20 minutes to cook a meal and then you put it in front of your kids and they're like, ugh, this is so gross. But if you cook with them, they're so much more willing to taste it and to try it. And so, I mean, yeah, we're seeing this as a kid's cookbook, but it's also a family cookbook, because I think if parents actually do this with their kids too, what a great way to introduce some new foods and meals into your weeknights. So
I think you're absolutely right. I think that a lot of the kids who tested recipes gave feedback like, I didn't think I liked this, and then I made it, and it turns out I do. Or I didn't like the smell of the fish sauce, but in dumplings, it was delicious. So it was sort of the act of cooking was like actively untangling a lot of their biases. And it's also like when you made something with your own 2 hands, you're predisposed to want to like it.
All right. Well, I have to share another highlight for me. So it's the tips for success section, which I just said has the illustrated part on how to cut the vegetables, but I love the specific tip on the importance of reading the entire recipe before diving in. Anyone who has ever just jumped right into a recipe knows, like, oh no, I totally missed a step. I've like ruined this whole dish. So I love that. But also on a nerdier sort of part of that is this is the Growing Readers podcast, and I'm always looking for ways to raise kids who just love to read. But you get so many comprehension lessons out of a cookbook. So
yeah.
I mean, you have to be able to read. You need to follow the instructions. You need to understand the instructions. So if you have a kid that doesn't like to read, but likes to do hands-on activities, cookbooks are amazing because they don't even know that they're reading.
Totally. And it requires them to problem solve, measuring. There's so many skills contained within a cookbook. I totally agree.
All right. Well, something else that I love is that your book not only provides recipes, but it also mentions the extra cookbooks from the various countries that are featured. So was that your idea to include those extra cookbooks in there?
Yeah, I strongly believe in admitting when you are not an expert and giving credit where credit is due and spreading the love. So, this cookbook, Priya's Kitchen Adventure, is very much an introduction to these cuisines, but maybe a kid cooks all the recipes from Japan and is like, I love Japanese cuisine. I want it to be like, well, here are the actual experts on Japanese cuisine. Go give their books a shot and you'll learn a lot. This is just going to give you a little taste, but there are people who have devoted their lives to these cuisines. And I strongly believe that in cookbooks, like the rising tide lifts all boats and we all need to, help each other. And this just felt like a great way to do that.
Yeah, I received that. I like that, the lifting up of one another and just, I mean, your book does that on so many different levels. Well, I have to ask you, of all of those moments when, we need to whip up something quick and delicious, what's your favorite go-to recipe?
Probably the soy sesame butter udon. You literally make a quick broth with like vegetable stock, mirin, and soy. You add udon noodles. You slice a boiled egg in half. You put scallions, some butter, and soy, and that's it. And you eat it. It is like, I told all the kids, I was like, if you like buttered noodles, you will love this dish.
That's perfect. All right. And so then on a flip side of that, maybe one of the recipes that it feels the most cherished to you. So what's in there that just really hits your heart as a good memory?
Probably the pear and gorgonzola ravioli. I was really nervous about the idea of like doing fresh pasta for kids, but my mom, who co-wrote my cookbook Indianish with me, was like, I think I can come up with a really easy fresh pasta recipe that just uses flour and water. And that ravioli brings me back to this amazing restaurant in Florence where I had that like ratatouille moment of realizing that salty cheese and sweet fruit like harmonize beautifully together. And they served it with this brown butter sage sauce and it was so delicious. And I just wanted to bring that memory to kids' plates. And just looking at that recipe reminds me of being in that restaurant in Florence. And it's also, in my mind, I think like one of the easiest fresh pasta recipes you can find.
Yum. And then on that same theme, with all of those kid testers that you had, was there one recipe that most of them seemed to just really love the most?
Yeah, there was one recipe that like blew kids' minds. And that was the recipe for profiteroles. And so profiteroles are a French dessert that's like, pastry with ice cream stuffed in the middle, topped with chocolate sauce, like what's not to like. And I had tasked my husband, who's an amazing baker, with developing a recipe, but I didn't want kids to be making choux pastry because it's really finicky and really, really technical. And so he came up with the idea of using butter toasted sweet rolls and then putting a scoop of ice cream in between them and making a very quick ganache in the microwave or on a stovetop. And it's like, it is like an ice cream sandwich, but better. It's like the cold ice cream, the buttery toast, the warm ganache drizzled over the top. The kids were losing their minds over that recipe. And I feel like for that reason, it's one of my favorites just because of how simple it is compared to how much kids just adored it.
Then, since you are a food reporter, I have to ask you, what question that is a common question that you like to ask, and would you ask it of yourself right now?
I'm always curious if someone could like eat one cuisine for the rest of their life, what it would be. Because I know my answer would be Indian food, but I'm curious what everyone else's answer would be.
I would be Indian or Thai. I have this Thai restaurant near me that does the best pineapple fried rice. And I told my husband, if I ever get to the point where I need one last meal, you need to go and get me some pineapple fried rice from this restaurant, because it's just the amount of, I don't know, they just get their flavors just right for me.
That's amazing. Yum.
Well, Priya, it's been such a delight chatting with you about this cookbook, Priya's Kitchen Adventures. So before we wrap up, and you have sort of suggested what the answer will be here, but I want you to end on this note. What impact do you hope that this cookbook has on young readers?
If you think about the foods that you are the most nostalgic for, that you find the most comforting, they are inevitably foods you had when you were young, when you were a kid. So imagine if when you were a kid, you were exposed to dozens of different flavors and you were as nostalgic for macaroni and cheese and dumplings as you were for onigiri and for ful medames. I genuinely think that if we want to normalize diversity in American cooking, we have to get to people when they're young. And so my hope is that this book will help to raise a generation of open-minded, curious, and empathetic cooks. And that in 30 years, that people of color won't be sitting in rooms at food magazines trying to argue for why their food deserves a place at the table, because everyone will have grown up with lots of different kinds of cuisines.
That's such a great answer. I mean, something that most books and travel have in common is that they often lead us to new discoveries. And so the idea that a cookbook can not only lead kids to new cuisines and flavors, but that a cookbook will also lead them to some new places and hopefully some new people and new connections, and provide them with new skills that will stay with them for a lifetime. I mean, that's incredible. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your incredibly thoughtful questions. And I am so excited to see all the things your daughter cooks from it.
Well, if I was a good food photographer, I would post them, but it might turn people off if I share my photos.
Please do. I hate the super manicured, fancy food photos. I like the real lived in ones.
All right. Perfect. Well, I promise I'll get you some. And then I realized I jumped in and shared my pineapple fried rice, but I actually want to know if you could only have one cuisine. You said Indian food, but is there like a specific dish?
Yes, there is a specific dish. It is dal and rice, lentils and rice. It is the most comforting thing in the world to me. I could eat bowls and bowls of it and never get tired. It brings me home. It's like a homing device for me. Dal.
The recipe that I'm most excited to try is the Trinidad. It almost had an Indian dish name, like
the curry chana.
Yeah, curry chana. Yes,
that is so good. And you got to have the cucumber chutney. It's really yummy. That goes with it.
Yeah, it was the whole combo that got me. It was the cucumber chutney, and that's the one I want to try first. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on this culinary journey today and on our quest for growing readers. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and found inspiration in Priya's adventures and insights. To learn more about Priya Krishna and Priya's Kitchen Adventures, visit her website at priyakrishna.me. You'll find this link in our show notes and links to order copies of the cookbook. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Growing Readers podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you enjoy listening so you never miss an episode filled with delicious conversations and mouth-watering stories. If you loved today's show, please consider leaving us a review. It helps us reach even more food and book lovers like yourself. And while you're at it, grab your phone and text a friend you know who would love to listen to this episode. Until next time, keep exploring, keep cooking, and keep savoring the flavors of life in the books you read. Take care and bon appetit. The Growing Readers podcast is a production of the Children's Book Review. For more great books like Priya Krishna's Priya's Kitchen Adventures, visit us at thechildrensbookreview.com.